Welcome to the Partace channel. Today, we explain Prophets Joshua chapter 1 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to look closely at what is truly a massive transition of leadership. We're talking about the dawn of a massive new historical undertaking, and we're going to focus strictly on the simple, plain meaning, the Peshat, of the text.
Picture this. We are standing right at a precipice in history. The Israelites have wandered the desert for 40 grueling years. Now, they're camped right on the edge of the Promised Land. But their legendary leader is gone, so what happens next? How on earth does a nation pivot from grieving a legendary prophet to executing a massive military campaign? Well, let's find out.
Here is the roadmap for how we're going to break this down today. We've got Section 1, Context and the Hook. Section 2, God's Charge to Joshua. Section 3, Mobilizing the Camp. Section 4, The Tribe's Pledge. Section 5, Practical Life Lessons. And finally, Section 6, the chapter recap. This structure is going to guide us methodically through God's commands, Joshua's actions, the people's remarkable response, and what we can actually take away from all this.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, Context and the Hook. A new era begins.
So the text opens incredibly abruptly in verses 1 and 2. It happens right after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. God speaks directly to Joshua, the son of Nun. Now Joshua is described as Moses' minister. The Hebrew word used here is mishrat, which means a really close personal attendant or assistant. God says it plainly. Moses has just died, and God immediately commands his assistant, Joshua, to step up and lead the Israelites across the Jordan River. It's wild because there's absolutely no lingering pause in the text here. No formal mourning period is even mentioned in these opening verses. The era of Moses is just over. Boom. It's instantly time for action. Joshua is tasked with taking all the people into the land that God is giving to the children of Israel.
Moving right along to Section 2, God's Charge to Joshua, Promises and Commands.
Now, what's fascinating about verses 3 and 4 is how God literally maps out the boundaries of the land. God promises Joshua that every single place he steps, his foot shall possess it, exactly as he promised to Moses. And God gives him a clear, tangible map of these huge borders. They stretch from the wilderness down in the south, way up to Lebanon in the north. They extend east all the way to the Great River, the Euphrates, taking in all the Hittite country and pushing all the way out to the Great Sea on the west, which, we call the Mediterranean Sea today. Now, why mention the Euphrates and the Hittite country? Because framing it around those ancient Near East power centers really helps us visualize the sheer vastness and the strategic importance of the territory Joshua is stepping into. It's huge.
Right after outlining the map, in verses 5 and 6, God gives Joshua a deeply personal guarantee. He promises Joshua that no man will be able to stand against him all the days of his life. Just as God was with Moses, he promises, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." And then comes this incredibly famous Hebrew command, chazak ve'ematz, be strong and courageous. He actually repeats this phrase multiple times. Why? Well, chazak relates to physical fortitude and strength in battle, while ematz is all about mental and spiritual resolve. Think about it. Joshua is stepping into the shoes of literally the greatest prophet in history, and he's tasked with leading millions into a brutal military campaign. He absolutely needs complete resolve on every single front.
But here's the thing. Courage isn't just physical. In verses 7 through 9, God explicitly tells Joshua that true success comes from strictly obeying and constantly keeping the book of the law, the Sefer HaTorah, at the very front of his mind. He must not turn from it to the right or to the left. And he's commanded to meditate therein day and night. Now, the Hebrew word used for meditate here is haga. And haga doesn't just mean sitting quietly and thinking. It actually means to mutter or to speak quietly. It implies a constant, ongoing verbal review and recitation of the law. The text makes a really direct link. If Joshua grounds his leadership in the constant verbal study and application of the Sefer HaTorah, then he will make his way prosperous and he'll have good success.
Okay, Section 3, Mobilizing the Camp, from words to action.
Empowered by God's promise, Joshua immediately shifts from this divine encounter to practical action. There's no hesitation at all. In verses 10 and 11, Joshua commands the officers of the people to go through the midst of the camp. The Hebrew word for these officers is shotrim, meaning organizers, foremen, or administrators. He tells the shotrim to prepare victuals, or in Hebrew tzedah, which means physical food and battle provisions. And they have a seriously strict window. Within 3 days, they are to completely pack up and pass over the Jordan. Just think about the sheer logistical magnitude of this for a second. We're talking about moving millions of men, women, children, and livestock across a flowing river in exactly 72 hours. He's setting a firm, unmoving timeline for the entire nation. Talk about decisive leadership.
Then, in verses 12 and 13, Joshua turns his attention to a very specific logistical and political issue. He directly addresses three distinct groups: the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. Now, to understand this plainly, we got to remember the historical context. These specific tribes had already requested and received their land inheritance from Moses on the eastern side of the Jordan River. They'd seen the incredibly rich pasture lands of Gilead and Bashan and claimed them for their massive flocks. So because they already had their comfortable land, there was a very real risk that they might just say, you know what, we're good, stay behind and let the remaining tribes fight the wars completely alone.
To prevent that, in verses 14 and 15, Joshua reminds them of the strict command Moses gave them. The terms of their original deal were incredibly clear. Their wives, their little ones, and their cattle, they are perfectly permitted to stay safely behind in the land east of the Jordan. But the men equipped for war, the Giburei Chayil, meaning the mighty men of valor, they have to cross the Jordan first. Notice the dynamic contrast here. While their families remain in total safety, the Giburei Chayil must march in the perilous vanguard to actually help the other tribes conquer their land. They literally cannot rest until the Lord gives rest to all their brethren. Only after the whole nation possesses their inherited land can these eastern warriors finally go back to their own homes.
Section 4. The Tribe's Pledge. Absolute Loyalty.
This brings us to the climax of the chapter's narrative arc. Will the people actually follow this new leader? The answer, found in verses 16 and 17, is a massive, resounding yes. The eastern tribes, stepping up to speak on behalf of the mobilized people, answer Joshua directly. They pledge absolute, unwavering loyalty, promising to obey him exactly as they obeyed Moses. They say, "Whatever you command us, we will do. Wherever you send us, we will go." I mean, think about how remarkable this is compared to the previous 40 years. In the wilderness, the Israelites constantly grumbled, right? They were always rebelling against Moses. But here, with Joshua, there's total, immediate, and unconditional submission. Their only prayer is that the Lord be with Joshua just as he was with Moses. And to prove how profoundly serious they are, in verse 18, the people enforce their own discipline. They actually establish a strict death penalty for anyone who rebels against Joshua's word or doesn't listen to his commands. Anyone who disobeys will be put to death. And then, incredibly, they echo God's own words right back to Joshua. They shout, "Chazak v'amatz," be strong and of good courage. The very words God used to comfort and command Joshua in private are now being shouted back to him by the entire nation he's leading. It shows a completely unified front from top to bottom. His authority is absolutely cemented.
Section 5. Practical Life Lessons. Applying the Text.
Okay, so what can we actually take away from all this? Let's extract some practical life lessons from the plain text of this historical transition. We learned 4 really timeless things here. First up, courage requires action. God absolutely promised Joshua victory, but that didn't mean they could just sit around waiting for it to happen. Joshua actively mobilized the Shotrim to get provisions ready. Faith and preparation have to go hand in hand. Second, true leadership is grounded in the law. Joshua's success wasn't rooted in raw military talent. It was rooted in constantly muttering, studying, and applying the Sefer HaTorah. Third, community unity is essential. If you've achieved your own comfort, like those eastern tribes in Gilead, your job isn't done if your neighbor is still fighting. That's what true community actually looks like. And fourth, keep your commitments. The tribes remembered the complex deal they made with Moses, and they honored it fully when Joshua took over.
Which brings us to Section 6, Chapter Recap, a swift transition of power.
Let's do a lightning-fast summary to make sure we've grasped the entire textual flow of the chapter we just walked through. We saw Moses pass away and God immediately commissioned Joshua. We saw the vast boundaries of the land established. Joshua sets a strict 3-day deadline for the camp to move. The eastern tribes are reminded of their vanguard duty. And finally, the entire nation pledges their absolute obedience, shouting back, "Shazak ve'amatz." It's honestly a masterclass in swift, decisive action. But now that the camp is mobilized and the people are totally unified, the reality of the Canaanite enemies is waiting right across the river. So the big question is, can this newly unified nation actually execute the military invasion, or will their courage completely falter the second they see the massive walled city of Jericho?
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.